Hello, my name is Tim Piotrowski, Social Media and Content Manager at ASCM. Today we have Peter Bolstorff, ASCM Executive Vice President of Innovation and Business Intelligence, and Douglas Kent, ASCM Executive Vice President of Corporate and Strategic Alliances with us. They'll be discussing the SCOR digital standard and how collaboration, community, and diversity of methodology enable industry professionals to build stronger supply chains together. If you have any questions during the discussion, feel free to ask in the comments. And take it away, Peter and Douglas.
Thanks, Tim. Hey, welcome everybody to LinkedIn Live event. I think between Douglas and I, if you were to add up our SCOR years together, I think we could retire.
Douglas. That's a good idea.
So Douglas, we'll get right into this. I want you to help me connect some dots. So sure. We asked our corporate members, and I'm gonna pull this up so I get it right, to pick from the most critical burning platforms for change in their company from the list. The number one response was standardization of supply chain processes enabling more effective learning organizations. So that was number one by a long shot. Number two was issues with SNOP or IBP or whatever we call that these days.
Shock.
And then the third one was this misalignment between business and supply chain strategy.
Yeah.
Now, again, Tim read the title of today is, how SCOR is a platform for collaboration. Love you to connect those two dots for the audience.
Well, I think if we go back to the inception of SCOR, we're still trying to answer the same problem that really led to its development, right? Is that in order to collaborate, you got to be able to speak the same language. And that means internally across, still isolated functional silos, but also when we extend that out across the ecosystem into our customer partners and our supplier partners, it becomes even that much more difficult if we're not speaking the same language. And as well as I do, back in 1997, when the companies got together to create version 1 of the SCOR model, it was for that purpose, right? It was for the purpose of, hey, if we're gonna make seamless integration across the enterprise, we have to have a vehicle that allows us to be able to speak the same language as it relates to processes and metrics, et cetera. And that's really what gave birth to the model. So that's why it's, is the default model for collaborative integration of supply chain across the ecosystem.
And we've had, again, since inception, probably over 5,000 organizations that have done exactly that. Hey, Tim, could you please put up the SCOR chart? So Douglas, we're gonna pivot right into there. And for those of you out there, I am both a mathematics teacher, but I'm also a psychologist. So that I understand, and I kind of in the middle brain, right? So I'm not really right brain, and I'm not really left brain. This is right brain SCOR, and this was the compilation of over 70 of our smartest colleagues sitting in a room, and I actually remember the room that we actually sat in, right? So actually putting this together. And as we think about the new SCOR, I'll call it the new SCOR digital standard, what struck me as my aha was this idea of this emerging process now called Orchestrate. And the challenge of, how do I orchestrate demand and supply while at the same time synchronizing the regenerative supply chain? Douglas, I would love, as you look at this graphic from your vantage point now, knowing that you traveled a lot around the community these last months, I'd love your top of mind thoughts.
Yeah, well, I remember the room where it all came together too, but I also remember the big dent in the wall where we were banging against it. So absolutely. I mean, those who are familiar with the model may remember that we used to have a thing called enablers, and it really grew up to the adult version, which we now call Orchestrate. And I think it's exactly, Peter, as you described it, which was really, we know the effectiveness of the processes can only increase its contribution to the supply chain efficiency and effectiveness if, in fact, we orchestrate effectively. So we took that box of enablers, which are really around things like business rules and regulatory and compliance aspects, and how we manage data and how we measure performance and all those aspects. But we added key elements in this orchestrate function. And the first one is what you said in the beginning, which is, do we have a supply chain strategy? Second, we said, okay, well, if you have a supply chain strategy, it also has to apply in a differentiated fashion across supply chain segments. So we added the segmentation piece. We added other factors for sustainability, as you mentioned, for the regenerative piece of it. We added circularity concepts into it. We added ESG into it, et cetera. So I think with that, there's lots of changes and goodness that made the model now so much more relevant. But that orchestration function and the expansion of the former enablers into these orchestration processes, I think, is probably one of the biggest and most important aspects of this new release.
There's a couple of phrases that I have as we're starting to kind of evangelize this new model out there. And one of them is this idea around bidirectional orchestration of demand and supply. And as part of our upcoming supply chain tour, by the way, all of you listening, I am shamelessly plugging our supply chain tour in North America. Go to our website, you'll find it. But as we think about this idea around bidirectional orchestration of demand and supply, one of the conversations is supply planning actually becomes a stream into the demand plan, because you can't simply do unconstrained demand planning anymore. And likewise, as you think about product as a service, and you think about the idea, it's not just manufacturing anymore, it's actually a transformational kind of an activity. And Douglas, I know you go way back into IBP, through your career as well. Can you give me a next level on and how you see that playing out, this new dimension?
Well, I think some of the research that we've done as well, right, simply points to the same factor, right? A traditional linear S&OP process is outdated, right? And the stability index, which we also just released in collaboration with KPMG, clearly indicates that we're in a situation where our supply chains are twice as fragile, and we've never had so many demand and supply shocks to the system simultaneously, right? Which means that you just can't manage the planning process in the old way. And I think, we both love the fact that the new illustration of the SCOR model shows the infinity loop, because that's what it feels like all the time,
exactly.
Right? We're constantly having to plan and replan and et cetera. And if you had a traditional planning process the way it was structured in the past, it simply couldn't cope. And a lot of companies are more fragile or have lost strategic resiliency because they don't know how to do that. They don't know how to take, as you say, those bi-directional signals and do something with it that at the end of the day, hopefully increases the level of accuracy within the forecast.
Great. I want to look at source for just a second. When we think about source in the old SCOR framework, and again, I have lots of colleagues that, have global sourcing CPO types, and they always told me, you only capture a fraction of what we do on a daily basis. And I think that was one of those things when we challenged ourselves in redesigning this, is how do we make sure that everybody in every industry can see themselves in the model and see their ecosystem in the model. Exactly. And again, those of you that are online, again, if you go to score.ascm.org, you can click on source, and you can see now that we've added strategic sourcing, direct procurement, and indirect procurement. And now I think we've been able to achieve that level of visualization of sourcing professionals in the model. Let's talk about the demand side. Notice there's no deliver, it's order and fulfill. Would love your thoughts around this omni-channel view, Douglas.
Yeah, well, so certainly what we recognize is that deliver in the old model had both an order management and an order fulfillment component to it. And the reason that it, at the end of the day, got split out is not just because the importance of each of those activities, which are now, as you mentioned, order and fulfill, but they're oftentimes done by different parts of the organization. Those who take and manage the orders and those who do the traditional fulfillment. So we did break each of those pieces out to give them their focus. But as you mentioned, also, if we want to really test the model, which was, as Peter mentioned, the litmus test of the model is, can you find yourself here? We needed to show the omni-channel view, because so many organizations, particularly as a result of the pandemic, had to shift in different ways to be able to satisfy different types of customers, both B2C and B2B, but also because organizations oftentimes are their own supplier or their own customer inside the organization. We also gave time for room in the model, if you will, for also intercompany activities, because we do have these complex organizations within their global supply chain where I can be my own supplier or my own customer inside of that. So the omni-channel view, B2C, B2B, intercompany, well represented in the former deliver, under now order and fulfill.
Great, thanks, Douglas. One more direction of I'll call it infinitely in motion. You know, sustainability has been on our top 10 trends, you know, gaining ground, you know, moving from the next 10 to the top 10. But again, I go back to manufacturing back in the day, and there was this whole idea around you needed to incorporate quality as part of the manufacturing process. It can't be just a separate process by itself. And as we see sustainability kind of approaching supply chain, sustainability as a concept obviously is an enterprise thing, but there's a significant part of the supply chain that is impacted by and impacts sustainability. And so this idea around how do we plan for the synchronization of that kind of a regenerative supply chain? I know you got a lot of passion around this one, Douglas. You know, what are the three things that you want the audience to really take away from this? I'll call it this vertical dimension of supply chain.
Yeah. So of course we work for an organization that has a vision that says that we're going to make the world better through supply chain. So sustainability is at the heart of that. We are releasing a new sustainability training on April 1st, a 2-day training just to help to educate about that, because as Peter, you rightly mentioned, we have, and I'm looking at all the people that are here, some nice names and friends and companies
I know.
etc. And I think one thing which is, you know, probably a fear across the globe, regardless of what country you're sitting in or what company you work for, is that there's a gap between what we aspire from a sustainability perspective and how we actually operationalize that into the supply chain. So many companies, so many countries have visions and missions about what they want to do to be more responsible to the planet. But when you go down and you talk to the supply chain professionals that have to do the work every single day, how much of that is operationalized into what they do? And that's really, I think, where we're so passionate about, you know, building education products and making the model more relevant with the inclusivity of those key sustainability factors. And as you know, it not only found its way into the orchestrate processes, but into best practices, et cetera. But we reorganized the entire SCOR mark benchmarking structure to make sustainability a key element within that benchmark.
Great. Hey, Ollie, you ask a great question. This is only looking at the SCOR model. You know, again, the process elements. There's a version of this where we replace the bubble chart from supplier to customer. We actually put the customer first. We don't have that graphic here, but there's a free SCOR DS learning module. So if you go to the SCOR model itself on the upper right-hand side, you'll find the free SCOR class. So you're right. You don't see it here, but it does exist. You know, obviously the ecosystem has to be representative. So Tim, if you could move to the third slide, Pete, please, in this sequence. Keep one more. All right, so we just looked at, I'm going to call it right-brained SCOR. And so this is the chart for all of us that are left-brained SCOR, right? Meaning, you know, how do we think about this logically, right? So in a nice box and a matrix. of that nature. So when we think about this chart, we've added some layers of things that need to be integrated. And Orchestrate was never really part of the previous model. And of course, we've had tons of feedback around, hey, where's strategy and where's all those kind of things. So what this chart illustrates are the level 2 processes underneath each one. So you can see Orchestrate, and then there's the list of level 2 Orchestrate processes on the right. Plan includes plan supply chain, which is typically S&OP or IBP. Then you've got that tactical planning. So how do we plan orders in the tactical horizon? How do we plan transportation or fulfillment? How do we plan transformation or manufacturing? How do we plan what we're going to be purchasing? And then how do we plan the return of materials? And then at the bottom, you've got our execution processes. And as you can see, this was a huge change in terms of operating models. You know, where in the past it used to be make to order, make to stock, engineer to order. We actually had to look at the operating models by process to make sure that we illustrated those things that are meaningful, because that whole make to order, make to stock was losing its meaning as it relates to some of the other applications. So Douglas, when you look at this chart, and I know you are an extrovert for sure, but I'm still trying to guess where you fall on the left or right brain, right? So I'm dead in the middle, right? So Douglas, if you could kind of share what your view of this chart looks like.
Well, I think when we set the technical task force objective, which is, you know, make this relevant, we didn't expect quite so many changes, right?
Right.
But again, going back to that litmus test, which is say, make sure everybody can find yourself into the model. And I think you mentioned a number of these already. But now it's hard not to find yourself in the model, right? We know we know the importance of plan, as you rightly mentioned, not just planning the overall supply chain, but planning the individual execution elements within, as you mentioned, order, fulfill, transform, source, and return it, for example. The importance of this is the fact that, you know, we still know that plan remains the least mature of our processes. We are better at executing than we are at planning. So our firefighting skills are better than our fire prevention skills. So it deserves its place there for sure. And then I think, just as we mentioned, some of the other key changes on omni-channel basis, on the fact that transform makes the model look less like a discrete manufacturing model, which was always the criticism before. Now we transform anything, including digital products. We transform services, we build solutions, etc. So I think those changes, along with the strategic sourcing pieces coming in, were certainly critical. But I don't want to leave out return, because this was also a huge discussion, very big, going back to our sustainability concerns as well, is that with the growth of e-commerce also comes the growth of returns. And again, that's another area where our forward logistics capability are 10 times more efficient than our return, and returns are on the rise, right? We're seeing massive growth in the number of returns, and our inability to manage that and what that could mean relative to the environmental aspects is also super important.
Hey, Tim, just again, shamelessly asking, I had somebody in there, could they share the supply chain tour link in there? So if you could do that, that would be great. Douglas, let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to deep dive into the planned supply chain one, because again, both of us kind of lived in that domain when we were with our respective practicing companies. One of the things that we've talked about is this idea around outside in market data.
Yeah.
And, so within the planned supply chain, folks, if you were to think about it, there's 4 processes underneath that. It's not represented here, but if you click through on the SCOR model, you'll see them. On the very first one, and if you click on that one, again, we would associate that with kind of demand planning. But one of the things that we did do is we really looked at just how are the challenges that we need to face, through the year 2030, and then how do we change the processes to be able to do that? And I guess the point I wanted to make is this isn't just a facelift. This was, this was really re-envisioning how the model is going to work, across all those kind of things. So when we talk about external data in, and we talk about all of those, connection points, Douglas, I know your team put a ton of effort into the level 3 processes. And I also know that we have a new partner that actually has made the SCOR level 3 and beyond, come alive. I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on those concepts for our audience.
Yeah, well, again, going back to the fact that the model is obviously the most prolifically used model to redesign your supply chain. It's at the heart of our corporate transformation efforts, and really elevating planned supply chain, taking a look at, again, outside in factors. I mean, when we talk about, I hear everybody talk about big data. We haven't figured out what to do with small data yet, right? So it's how do we consider which of those outside in factors actually do have an influence on our plan, making sure that we can capture them and drive that demand planning engine with those that do bring a degree of accuracy to our forecast. But also to your point, I mean, I reemphasize in orchestration, process number 11 was the enterprise business planning, right? So, which didn't exist there before. That's your IBP or EBP processes, which really says, okay, one thing is we got to be able to connect all the transactional plans that we see here on the chart from plan order to plan return. We got to pull all of that up in a less linear fashion that is much more dynamic into plan supply chain. But let's not forget, we got to connect that to other parts of our strategic business planning and financial planning processes. So again, just saying it still remains the most difficult, least mature process across the supply chain. So I think with the new model, we also gave a lot of, I think, good strength to the importance of that, because of the fact that it still remains the least mature of the processes.
Great. Thanks, Douglas. Tim, if you could go to that second slide. So in the setup of this, second thing is, and again, we'll talk to Gartner here in a minute, but when we are always asked, do I have to be a SCOR shop, to use SCOR? And the answer is emphatically no. Again, I'm a black belt. Every company that we go into, they have their own toolbox of continuous improvement kinds of things. SCOR is never a replacement for. It's always an and. And if you were to look at our corporate top 10 and you were to look at the Gartner top 25, there's almost a huge overlap. And so I'll just use that as an example. It's not the only one. But when we think about what our organizations do, again, they use what works for them. They leverage the strengths from both organizations or all tools. So it's never really one versus the other one. Douglas, if you could just give me some insight. Again, you travel around and again, from a corporate engagement standpoint, you're talking to our corporate clients every day. Would love your thoughts around this idea that it's not either or, it's both.
Yeah, I'm gonna answer, but I'm also gonna ask our audience a question, Peter.
Great.
So I mean, just put it in the chat. But to Peter's point, there's lots of tools in the toolbox, right? And they come from different places. So whether that's more analyst style from a Gartner or advisory from one of the big advisory firms, or what you get from an education standpoint from associations, if you are using more than one of those, if more than one of those is in your toolbox, just type yes in the chat box and let us know that. Because I think, Peter, your point is quite simply that there are lots of ways to transform your supply chain. The SCOR model is at the heart of that for us, because we believe that it's important that if you're going to transform your supply chain, that you have to first diagnose what's working and what's not working, and the SCOR model helps with that. So I see people chatting in here.
Yep, got it. Thanks, David.
Yeah, hi, Glenn. So absolutely. So just say yes or tell us who you're using. What are your favorites? But I think the point is that we go to different places for different things, and that's okay. And we support the work that's being done from an advisory standpoint and from a the other types of companies that are out there to help to assist, that offer other frameworks or that provide analyst insights, etc. And that's okay. Right. I think it's important that you know when and how to use the difference, but them sitting simultaneously, just like when we first, Peter, you'll remember, I hate to take us back days again, but you remember this was the discussion around lean, right? Yeah. How could I use SCOR and be a lean Six Sigma company? Well, that's ridiculous, right? Of course you can do both. So I think it's important for everybody to understand there's space in the toolbox for different tools, and we occupy one part of that space.
Great. In closing up, again, LinkedIn Live. I'm getting the eye from Tim. So I'm going to summarize this. First of all, it's SCOR and. First of all, so the idea is I don't have to pick either or. It's SCOR and. The next question is, how do I learn more about SCOR and the new model? And I'm going to give you the two easy answers, and then I'm going to leave the hard answer for Douglas. Right? So that's just the way that we play. So the easy answer is the model is open. That was a big shift, so that we could get broad ecosystem adoption. So that means you don't need to log in. You don't need anything. You just go to score.ascm.org and you're there. So number one, play around with the model. It's very intuitive in terms of how you move around with it. The second thing is, if you go to the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see there's a free course. The only thing you need to do is you need to have an active account, not a membership, but an active account with ASCM. And then you can take that course. It's about 3 hours. It's not just content coming at you. It's more of a dialogue on a coach and a mentor. So it's kind of a situational learning opportunity. I'm told it's quite good. Now, those are the easy ones. Douglas, how do you learn more from a corporation? If we think about a corporation who wants to learn more, if you're thinking about a group of people who want to learn more, or if there's an individual who wants to go to a public class.
Yeah. So we continue training on the model. In fact, we've never trained so many people in such a short period of time.
It's been a while.
So of course we have, I make mention, we have the SCOR DS, the digital standard course, which is a 2-day course that teaches you about the model, also gives you insights about how to use the model for the purpose of corporate transformation, as I mentioned before. And I will say again, we have a new sustainability course, which is being launched April 1st, which is also important. People understand the connectivity between operating a supply chain efficiently and the other triple bottom line factors of the ecological aspects and the ethical aspects. So certainly that, I think both Peter and I would love to link in with you individually, answer questions that you might have about how to better utilize the model. But from a training perspective, I think, getting in there, understanding from a hands-on perspective what the model is all about, but more importantly, how to use that to drive transformation. Make the world better through supply chain, and let SCOR help you do that.
How many partners did you train in the last 6 months to be able to deliver SCOR DS training?
Well, let's say I had hair when I started, right? So, well, we did. I'd say we had about 10 weeks between the September ASCM Connect launch of the model to the holiday period in December, and in that period, we already trained 200 people, okay, including a boatload of instructors, and some are out here on the call today. And the forecast for that is that will probably double in the next quarter. So get in on one of the classes. Again, you can find classes by partners all across the globe, both live and virtually, by looking at our website, and you can see what courses are coming your way.
Great. Douglas, it is always a pleasure. It seems like the only time we get to talk and engage with one another when we do these webinars or things like that one. So it's always good to see. I know you're traveling and quite busy. For those of you on the LinkedIn Live, thank you so much. It's been really an interactive one. I've been just seeing the whole thing scrolling, right to left or up to top to bottom. A lot of, as you said, a lot of people that I recognize and know. Get engaged. The content's there. Don't get left out. Don't get left behind. So with that, Tim, I'm going to turn it back over to you. And again, thanks everybody enjoy the rest of your day, evening, or morning.
Thank you, Peter.